Hello, welcome to our technical session on building resilience in the water sector. In this session, there will be 3 presentations followed by a question and answer session. My name is Wayne Williams, the Executive Director of the CWWA, and I will be moderating this session. First of all, as always, I'd like to give a warm thank you to our conference sponsors. We really appreciate the folks at Sandpick Contracting Cayman, our gold sponsors, Deal Metering, Mia Water, our silver sponsors, Water Engineering and Pipeline Company, WEPCO, Consolidated Water Company Limited, Dart Enterprises Limited, Florida Aquastore, and Agro American. Thank you very much. Before we get started on the session, I'd like to briefly review a few items. You have the opportunity to submit text questions at any time using the Q&A section on Hover. And if you're on Zoom, you can put it in the chat. Questions will be answered during the live Q&A immediately after the 3 presentations. So when possible, please include the name of the speaker the question is addressed to in your question. You could just put their first name. This is a collaborative session where all in attendance will be able to engage in the discussion during the live question and answer period. Now, I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Kevin Carter. Kevin Carter has worked with South Florida Water Resources for over 30 years. Since July 2015, Kevin has been the Broward County Water and Wastewater Services Assistant to the Director, with a focus on legislative and intergovernmental affairs, as well as special projects like grants. He holds leadership positions in the Florida section of the American Water Works Association, Florida Water and Environment Association, and the Florida Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network. He is also an Operators Without Borders Advisory Committee member. Previously, he worked with the South Florida Water Management District for 7 years and also spent 14 years with Broward County's Environmental Agency. He is a CWWA member, and this is his 3rd conference presentation. He serves on the CWWA's Water Loss Specialist Group, as well as the 30th Anniversary Committee. Kevin is also an adjunct professor at Broward College. Mr. Carter, it's now time for your presentation.
Good day, Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, and many congratulations to CWWA as we celebrate our 30th anniversary and conference and exhibition. Thank you to the Cayman Islands. I'm very excited to be part of the virtual conference and exhibition you're hosting this year. And I want to thank each of the audience members for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us as we talk about resiliency in the Caribbean. I'll be sharing some water reuse lessons learned from the state of Florida in the United States, and can they be applied to the Caribbean to increase water reuse production in the region. Please take down my contact information, as I want to see this as the start of a conversation to provide solutions to drought resiliency in the Caribbean. Want to go through some of today's major themes. Water reuse is certainly a resilience tool used around the world and to handle droughts and other water supply pressures. For example, in Florida, population growth is one of the reasons that Florida has become a national leader in water reuse production. We know that many Caribbean nations are water scarce and that droughts are only going to increase with climate change in the region in the future. We know that Caribbean wastewater management, there are solutions being developed, and some of those solutions include thinking of wastewater not as a waste stream, but as a resource to help with water scarcity and drought resiliency. And I want to talk about ways that the Florida water sector can facilitate water reuse development in the Caribbean due to our successes, and what can the Caribbean water reuse story learn from the Florida water reuse story to make it a success. So many of you may be asking, what is water reuse? Well, water reuse is essentially treating various types of water to meet a beneficial end use, and essentially thinking as water is water, no matter what its history is. And we see this within the One Water concept, where the important part is focusing on the needed treatment to meet that beneficial use. We also see water reuse in an integrated water resource management strategy where it's used as an alternative water supply to augment traditional water sources such as groundwater or surface waters. Now, you may hear the term reclaimed water and recycled water used interchangeably with water reuse. For this presentation, I'll focus on the term water reuse and also be focusing on reuse of municipal wastewater effluent, such as some of the uses shown on the figure to the left: energy sector, industrial processes, irrigation in both an agricultural and urban setting, recreational ornamental uses, and then replenishing aquifers or even making it drinking water. Looking across the globe, water reuse is certainly a resource for drought resiliency and other water supply pressures. Israel is a global leader. 90% of its municipal wastewater is reused for agricultural irrigation. If you look at the top photo there, you'll see a reservoir to capture rainwater, but also a water reclamation facility producing water reuse. Together, they are able to create green fields of agriculture in what would otherwise be a desert. Singapore produces 40% of its public drinking water from potable reuse, and you'll see the second picture there, membranes that are able to treat the water to a highly safe and reliable level. Singapore plans to go up to 55% of its drinking water needs by 2060. The United States, state of California, produced over 82 billion gallons just for agricultural use, again in a very arid region of our country, and 31% of the state's total water reuse production went to producing food. Turning now to my home state, Florida is a national leader with over 800 million gallons a day produced in 2020, which equates to just over 320 billion gallons for the whole year. Irrigation of lawns, golf courses, and parks is the number one use. If you look at the chart there from our Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And that makes sense with a population of over 20 million people and, of course, millions of visitors each year. There's a need for much irrigation. However, we have numerous other uses, including wetlands, industrial uses such as power plants, groundwater recharge that will either help our natural environments or be used for public water supply, and then agriculture irrigation. Now, I would note that even though some of those other uses have smaller percentages, it's still a relatively large volume. For example, agriculture irrigation, though just 6% of the state, still represents 19 billion gallons for the year. So how did we get here? How did the state of Florida become a water reuse leader? Well, you got to go all the way back to 1967 when the state's capital, city of Tallahassee, the utility, developed one of the first agricultural water reuse pilot projects in the country. 10 years later, the city of St. Petersburg in the Tampa Bay region became one of the first urban water reuse projects in the United States. And in 1986, a couple of urban utilities partnered with their agricultural community to develop one of the largest citrus irrigation projects in the world. Now, all three of these projects have a central theme that one of the goals was to either limit or cease surface water discharges. In 1989, the state of Florida realized water reuse's importance and declared it a state policy objective, and some of the first rules were developed. In 1993, rules were continued, and Florida was already reaching 300 million gallons a day of water reuse production. Moving further along in the 1990s, the state of Florida legislature and governor passed 4 laws to promote water reuse, including the Apricot Act, whose implementation is still important today. In 1999, some groundwater recharge and indirect potable reuse rules were passed. It also included new pathogen monitoring. In 2003, building on the successes that had led to the state reaching 600 million gallons a day of water reuse production, DEP published a reuse strategy to plan out the next 20 years to continue the successes of the past. And to build on that, the state of Florida passed a very important law to increase funding for water reuse projects, which moved us into the 21st century. In 2008, the state of Florida enacted the Ocean Outfall Law, which is another example of where surface water discharges are either ceased or limited in order to produce more water reuse. In 2009 through 2013, DEP and the utilities formed a think tank in order to create more solutions to produce even more water reuse in the future. And this led to a law passed by the state of Florida that clarified water reuse ownership in 2013. By 2017, the state of Florida reached an amazing record of 800 million gallons a day of water reuse production. Now, over the last 5 years, potable reuse, where you treat water reuse to drinking water standards, has become a main focal point, and a potable reuse commission released a report used by the state of Florida in 2020 to enact a law which required potable reuse rulemaking, which is ongoing today. And just this past spring in 2021, the state of Florida passed another law that limits surface water discharges in order to increase water reuse production. So I just went through about 50 years of history in 3 slides in order to tell the Florida water reuse story to help the Caribbean water reuse story. So what are some takeaways? Well, certainly having your policy leaders be an important part of the process can lead to success. The legislation passed by the state of Florida led to critical milestones in our water reuse story. It led to important rulemaking by our agencies, and then once it was a state of Florida priority, funding followed. Also, our general public saw that our state leaders were embracing new technology to make their lives better, and that helped our overall public education and acceptance. Now, you'll note many laws promoting water reuse in Florida also banned or limited surface water discharges. And I think this is an important point to remember when we think where we want Caribbean wastewater management and water reuse to be in the future. Having a proactive government agency was also important. I think this is really exemplified by the fact that Florida utilities actually named their top annual water reuse award after a former Florida Department of Environmental Protection employee, Dr. David York, who was an international and national leader in water reuse in the 90s through the 2010s. And plus, a proven need will lead to a tool being developed. The state of Florida needs alternative water supplies. We have over 1,000 people moving to our state every day, and we do have droughts. And so, in order to build resilience to both of these issues, water reuse became a priority in our state. So we know Florida has droughts, and we certainly know that the Caribbean has droughts and drought resiliency needs. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization listed 7 Caribbean countries in the world's top 36 water-stressed countries, with Barbados being in the top 10. And certainly the agriculture sector is especially vulnerable to seasonal droughts. FAO and the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Building Governance and Resilience in the Water Sector, along with numerous other sources, know that the Caribbean must prepare for more climate change-induced drought and water scarcity. Now, an important part of drought resiliency is it's important not just by itself, but also due to several other water security driving forces, such as adequacy, accessibility, assurance, and affordability that Dr. Adrian Cashman talks about in his 2013 document that I've cited there. So we've already got a lot of challenges with water security, and drought is just one, but it's certainly an important one for us to find solutions. Shifting gears just a little bit, we're going to talk about Caribbean wastewater management solutions. Because if we're going to see water reuse growth in the region, it's got to go hand in hand as wastewater management improves. And we need those improvements because it's thought that approximately 80% of Caribbean wastewater is discharged with little to no treatment. One of the key programs that's leading solutions in the area is the Caribbean Regional Fund for Wastewater Management. You can see that 18 countries have already signed up for this very important program that's being financed by the Global Environment Facility and implemented by the Inter-American Development Bank and the United Nations Environmental Program's Caribbean Environmental Program, along with some other partners. Now, I really like the first couple of goals of GF Crew Plus and developing norms, strategies, and policies, as well as getting the appropriate finance mechanisms. Certainly, having policy set and funding secured is an important part of the Florida water reuse story success. And as they look to design and construct climate resilient wastewater facilities, I think it's important that they're also saying, let's not treat wastewater as a waste, but as a valuable resource. So as you're going along and building new wastewater facilities, what better time to either construct a water reuse facility or at least plan for its addition in the future? The World Bank also is working towards wastewater management solutions both in the Caribbean and Latin America. I would encourage you to read the document From Waste to Resource, Shifting Paradigms Within the Region that was developed by Rodriguez et al. For the World Bank in 2020. I particularly liked one statement in the document that said wastewater treatment is one solution to the water scarcity issue and also to the problem of water security, i.e. water reuse development. Now, the World Bank has 4 action steps that they see leading to this shifting paradigms. One is planning wastewater within the watershed, the integrated water resource management strategies. Moving from, again, thinking of wastewater as waste and instead thinking of it as a resource. They also, of course, focus on finance and in policy and institutional change and regulations, very similar to the GF Crew Plus recommendations and very similar to the backbone of Florida water reuse successes. So it's good to see the World Bank also joining other initiatives in the region to improve both wastewater management as well as water reuse production. So let's talk about combining drought resiliency and wastewater management solutions, because if we're going to increase water reuse in the Caribbean, it's got to go hand in hand with both. And I really like this title from the Gleaner in Jamaica, Wastewater Reuse, a Solution for Caribbean Water Woes. And this article actually was covering a document that I really encourage you to read, Status, Need, and Role of Freshwater Storage in the Caribbean, that was written by Annika Cole and Dr. Adrian Cashman for the Global Water Partnership. And so water reuse could be used as one tool, as well as stormwater harvesting and storage, which is certainly very important to capture fresh water that could be lost, for example, to sea during heavy rainfall. Storing that water for future use is critical for water supply augmentation. Water loss and non-revenue water solutions. Some places in the Caribbean report up to 70% of water loss from the plant before it gets to the customers. And so those are certainly an area that we need improvements in the region. I'm very happy to report CWWA has started a water loss specialist group that I'm privileged to be part of. And please contact me after my presentation if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing. Personal rainwater harvesting, another area that Global Water Partnership is a leader in. I would encourage you to go to their website, the Caribbean Rainwater Harvesting Toolbox. And then we know desalination is a very important tool for drought resiliency. And Peter's in an important 2015 paper looking at water reuse in the Eastern Caribbean, he emphasized, using both together to increase the overall water supply and increase resiliency to drought. And no matter what water reuse type you end up doing, we like to say in Florida, right reuse, right time, right place. It's going to depend on what the needs are of a country or even the particular part of a country. Building off the one Gleaner article, I decided to see how much water reuse is being talked about in the press, as we look to think of one of the challenges to water reuse's growth is educating our policymakers and the public. I found another Gleaner article that had Dr. Chris Corbin from UNEP, Caribbean Environmental Program, Wastewater, Too Valuable to Overlook. I read both the Gleaner and the Jamaica Observer, which has a great headline, Reclaiming Water, a Solution to One of Jamaica's Problems. Looking over to Barbados, The Advocate put out an editorial, Reduce and Reuse Wastewater. And down in Trinidad and Tobago, The Guardian has an excellent article on taking the yuck factor out of recycled water. All these articles are important because having positive news headlines is something that can help your overall public education. So as public education and policymaker education as well is some of the challenges, what are some recommendations going forward for a Florida and Caribbean water reuse collaboration to be able to increase water reuse production in the region and tackling challenges and grasping opportunities to do so. Well, I think we can get together and start looking at feasibility assessments in the areas and understanding where the gaps are to make water reuse successful, and where's the most opportunities to start some pilot projects and explore, which countries would grasp this technology sooner than others. And of course, in order to do that, there is building the political support and finding the funding mechanisms, both within the region and outside, to develop successful projects. We've talked at length about public education and acceptance. The laws and regulations need to be developed. They don't and will not likely mirror what we've done in Florida, but certainly we can learn from the engineering and technical considerations that went into the rules in Florida and that have went into successful projects, and taking that information, understanding them within each Caribbean nation's ability and desire to use the technology. Other ways I think with the Florida Caribbean water reuse collaboration grow is, hosting virtual seminars. We're all Zoom savvy by now. And then once COVID's gone, have in-person workshops and field demonstrations. Importantly, this is really not just a Florida Caribbean discussion. This is an international discussion. We certainly in Florida look out across our country and the world to experts on water reuse to increase our production, including Singapore and Israel. And so having those conversations with the Caribbean water sector will be just as important. I think developing sort of a catalog, a networking group, having all of us, readily available to learn from each other. And then twinning is an important idea, not just for water reuse, but all water sector needs between the Caribbean and Florida. And it's something I'd like to see grow as we continue to see water reuse production grow in the Caribbean. I've talked several times of how important it is to educate our policymakers and get their support for water reuse. Certainly CWWA is a leader in the region, as well as CWASA, in working with policymakers such as the High-Level Forum of Caribbean Ministers responsible for water. I'd like to work with those organizations to, raise its priority. I believe it's been referenced to this forum, but making it a higher priority, I think, is important. The Regional Strategic Action Plan for Building Governance and Resilience in the Water Sector, as you all know, the RSAP, raising the level of water reuse as that document is implemented, raising the awareness as its importance as a resilience tool, and then capacity building. Once we really get rolling with water reuse, we're going to have to train people, and what's the best training platform and to get those needs met. So that brings us to the end of my presentation, and I believe conversations lead to solutions. So let's talk. I look forward to hearing our other panelists and the questions and answers that we have time to go through today. Again, there's my contact information. This is a start of a conversation. I want to thank CWWA and the Cayman Islands again for going virtual in 2021. And happy 30th anniversary. Please join us at October 5th from 3 to 4 o'clock, because we got a very special anniversary session planned, and I know you will enjoy looking back in time so that we can look forward.
Thank you, Mr. Carter, for your presentation. And just as a gentle reminder, you can post your questions in Hover chat or on this Zoom chat, and then we will, at the end of the 3 presentations, we will post the questions to each of the speakers. Just a gentle reminder, put their first name in front of your question so that we know to whom to address it. I love that statement, Kevin. Wastewater is too valuable to overlook. I love it. Now I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Ms. Candice Santana. Candice was raised in a rural village named Tabaquite on the edge of the Navid Dam in Trinidad and Tobago, and found her calling in the water sector very early in life. She completed tertiary studies in water resources management and technology, while engaged in academic work in the field of agriculture, climate change, rural development, and planning. Currently, She's finishing up on a Master of Science in Project Management. The last 17 years of her life was spent working at the Water and Sewage Authority, WASA, in Trinidad and Tobago. Excuse me. She has also spent this time participating in the water and sanitation sector around the Caribbean region. Eventually, in 2016, she was elected to serve as the secretary on the Executive Council of the CWWA. Through this organization, she has worked on policy development, governance, capacity building mechanisms, and various other projects for the Caribbean region in water, waste management, and climate change and resilience. Climate change and resilience. Outside the water sector, she has a passion for agriculture, youth development, gender equality, body positivity, and Caribbean culture. Ms. Santana, it's now time for your presentation.
Welcome to my presentation using a water security index approach to drive targeted projects, the Tobago experience. Let me take you through today's agenda. First, I will look at why water security. Then I will define it. After that, I will look at a water security index. And finally, I will take you on a trip to Tobago, where we would look at the Tobago experience. Why water security? The United Nations gave us the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs recognizes that development and economic prosperity depend on sustainable management of freshwater resources and ecosystems. All the SDGs are interconnected, all 1 to 17. And we all know that water is needed for agriculture, energy, domestic purposes, tourism, and of course, industrial production. Our experience in the Caribbean currently tells us that our dry seasons have been littered with periods of extreme drought, while our rainy seasons have had torrential rainfall, resulting in both flash flooding and riverine flooding. The intensity and frequencies of both extremes in the last decade would have increased. In many of our countries, water resources are commonly developed and managed by different government agencies, and within different sectors can foster lack of coordination and, of course, a fragmented approach. Most Caribbean small island developing states also cope with fragile economies, limited finances, human capital, as well as limited land for use. This can cause us to lag behind the rest of the world when it comes to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As small island developing states, we may not be able to make big steps to get to the SDGs and accomplish those goals, but we may need to take small steps. These small steps can be and should be water security milestones that are measurable. Let's now define water security. UNESCO in 2010 gave us one of the best definitions, in my opinion, of water security. It says, the capacity of a population to safeguard access to adequate quantities of acceptable quality water for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socioeconomic development, for ensuring protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and for preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. We also know that there are many definitions for water security. Through Dr. Cashman's work, he would have identified that there are common elements in all the water security definitions that we can find. Those common elements look at adequacy, which is basically the amount of water that is available. Accessibility, how much water is available when and where. Affordability, how water is paid for, as well as the financial position of state agencies. And of course, assurance. This is the ability to secure safe and sufficient water resources to deal with system shocks. An overview of a water security index. This water security index is adopted from the Asian Development Bank, appropriately capturing all the water resources issues. These dimensions include domestic water security, urban water security, economic water security, environmental water security, and finally, water-related disaster resilience. Along with these dimensions, the ADB developed indicators which allow for quantitative approach to water security within those dimensions. Each indicator and subsequently the dimension is given a score, typically out of 5. These are then averaged to create an overall national water security index. One dimension is given a particular score out of 5. The average will then be taken and a national water security score given. The scores from 1 to 5 would indicate different things. 1 would be hazardous, 2 engaged, 3 capable, 4 effective, and of course 5. 5 would indicate that this system is a model system. Let's now look at the Tobago experience. In Tobago, which is one of the southernmost countries in the Caribbean, part of Trinidad and Tobago, improving water security is a major subset of climate proofing the water sector here. Increasing uncertainties ranged from drought, flooding, financial constraints, of course, now more than ever due to global pandemics such as COVID-19, all of this now placing additional strain on the water sector and the impact and the ability to supply potable water. Water, of course, is an economic driver and a necessity to public health and sanitation and a means for improving the standard of living. When we look at this water security index in Tobago, we decided to go with some of these indicators as you see before you here. Under the domestic water security dimension, we decided to go with access to pipeline water, provision of 24/7 supply, access to improved sanitation. Under urban water security, we decided to go with non-revenue water as a percentage of the system, percent of waste water treatment, and drainage coverage. Under economic water security, we decided to go with water use in the agriculture sector and water use in the tourism sector. These two sectors represent the most economic sectors in Tobago, and these are the two sectors that contribute most to that island's economy. Under the environmental water security, we decided to look at the overall development of water resources and of course, watershed disturbances. Under water-related disaster resilience, we decided to look at drought resilience and flood and storm surge resilience. Climate change, we wanted to look at climate change, but at this junction, we felt that we wanted to take a small step and not necessarily a big step to bite off a big chunk in terms of climate change. So let's get into the meat of the matter. When we looked at the domestic water security in Tobago, we recognized that between 80 to 90% had an access to pipeline water. So of course, a score of 4 was given. When we looked at access to 24/7 supply though, we realized that less than 60% of the population had that access. So a score of 1 was given. When we looked at sanitation and improved sanitation, we realized that between 80 to 90% had access, so a score of 4 was given. Overall, Tobago received a domestic water security score of 3. Remember earlier, I told you what 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 meant. Well, 3 is capable. Under urban water security, we looked at NRW, non-revenue water, as a percentage of the system. We realized that between 40 to 50% was lost, so a 3 was given. Wastewater collection as a central system, less than 40% of Tobago had coverage, so a 1 was given. We wanted to look at drainage coverage, and during the course of our study, we realized that data for an indicator was not available. Overall, Tobago received a score of 2 for urban water security. This means that we are just engaging and much more needs to be done under this dimension. Economic water security. We had to look at both the agriculture sector and the tourism sector. We had many meetings with the THA, which is the Tobago House of Assembly, and we received verbal information and more qualitative information. We was able to give a score of 3 for both sectors. However, this is a part of the dimension that we want to relook in the future. This is an area that we feel that we need to collect more data that is applicable to this type of study. Under environmental water security, we looked at the water stress indicator, and we realized that in terms of water resources development, we're sitting at an average of 0.3 to 0.1, which gave us a score of 4. In terms of watershed disturbance, we reviewed environmental policies, testing criteria, and previous consultation. And given what we saw, we decided to give it a score of 3. This is another area that we feel we need to come up with another indicator that might be more quantitative than qualitative. Overall, we gave Tobago an environmental water security score of 3.5. Water-related disaster resilience. When we look at drought resilience, we looked at reservoir storage and trucking volumes, and we gave Tobago a score of 2.5 based on this. In terms of flood, we needed another indicator, and this is work that we will do and complete in the future. So therefore, overall, Tobago received a score of 2.5 under this dimension. Of course, we wanted to look, as I said earlier, at the impact of climate change on Tobago. At this junction, we did not do this. So this brings us to the overall water security index for Tobago. Domestic 3.0, urban 2.0, economic 3.0, environmental 3.5, water-related disaster 2.5, with an overall score of 2.8. This means that Tobago sits somewhere between engaged and capable, as I said earlier. What does this mean in moving forward? It means that we can do targeted projects to target particular areas. We realize that under domestic water security, we need to pay attention to access to 24/7 water supply. Under urban water security, we decided that we needed to pay more attention to non-revenue water and, of course, wastewater collection. Under water-related disaster resilience, we needed to pay more attention to drought resilience and sometime after that, climate change. What's important in what I just said is that 3 of these areas would have synergies and linkages. Non-revenue water access to 24/7 water supply and drought resilience, as we know, all would have linkages. Possible projects to look at would include demand management program, leak repair program, universal metering, increasing water storage capacity, exploring new water sources, and finally, a water information management system. We would want to move from 2.8 to 3.0 to 2.2 to 2.4 in the future. These are measurable movements that we can look at. When we look at demand management program, we would have a greater amount of water to share among the citizens, and this would increase the access to 24/7 supply. This would also assist with drought resilience. A leak repair program, which could take us, right now, non-revenue water is between 40 to 50%. If we could get that down to somewhere around 30%, we would of course have more water available for persons in terms of access to 24/7 water supply. We would be able to store water in terms of water storage, increasing water storage capacity to build drought resilience. And of course, we're addressing the issue of non-revenue water. Universal metering. This is one that we have talked about several times in the past and will continue to talk about. One of the things about all of these projects listed here is, of course, the cost factor and metering. As we know, universal metering would take on a cost. However, universal metering will help us address all three of these issues. Increasing water storage capacity, as I said earlier, of course, would target drought resilience most. However, it would also address access to 24/7 supply. No need to go further into exploring new water sources. The final project, a water information management system. We have done several projects in the past and we realized how fragmented our data would be and that our water resources and water sector data would sit in various government agencies and ministries, and pulling them all together will help in one system, would help us update our water security index further and elaborate on it further, giving us a more robust water security index. I wish to acknowledge at this point in time Mr. Mead, Mr. Francois, Dr. Hussein, Mr. Atkinson, and of course the staff at Water Resources. I thank you for tuning in to my presentation here today. And if you have any questions, I am here to answer them. This is a topic that I am very passionate about, and I believe that a water security index, developing water security index for countries across the Caribbean is the way to go, and then developing targeted projects to move your water security index from one point to another. All in all, I wish for us to do this, for us, of course, to take small steps to get to that big step, where we can accomplish and achieve our sustainable development goals under Goal 6 for clean water and sanitation. Thank you kindly for joining me today as I went through my presentation using a water security index approach to drive targeted projects, the Tobago experience.
Thank you, Ms. Santana, for your presentation. Very interesting. And just as a gentle reminder to everyone that you can post your questions in the chat, both in Hover and on Zoom here, and we will address them to the appropriate speaker at the end of this presentation. For this presentation, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Mr. Eugenio Barrios. About 30 years, Eugenio has shaped a solid experience in water resource management at national and regional level. He is a professional engineer from the University of Mexico and a Master of Science in Environmental Engineering from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Early in his career, he worked for the National Water Commission in Conagua and the Institute of Engineering at UNAM, which is the University of Mexico. From 2004 to 2019, he took several positions at WWF Mexico, and Latin America. He developed the National Environmental Water Resources Program in Mexico. He was a member of the WWF Global Freshwater Practice Leadership Team, the Scientific and Technical Review Panel of the Ramsar Convention 2012 to 2015, the Mexico National Water Council, and president of the Mexico National Wetlands Committee 2018 to 2019. He was Deputy Director General of CONAGUA and currently is an international consultant on water and environmental policies. He has worked for UNEP, World Bank, IDB, AGWA, and WWF US. Mr. Barrios, you may now start your presentation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eugenio Barrios, and I'm presenting this paper that I developed working with Christopher Corbin, Program Officer of the Cartagena Convention Secretariat. The reason the title of this paper, as you can see, is an integrated water resource management framework to support the implementation of the Cartagena Convention. This paper was based in an information document that I developed for the convention early this year to support the discussion on how to have a better integration of water management in the convention, and how to develop those synergies that are pretty much needed at this time to advance the global agenda, not only at the regional level, but at country level. The Convention for the Protection and Development of the Marine Environment of the Wider Caribbean Region, referred to as the Cartagena Convention, entered into force in 1986. Is the only regional legal framework for the protection and development of the wider Caribbean region, and include 3 protocols concerning land-based sources of pollution, oil spills, and especially protected areas and wildlife. The LBS protocol, adopted by the Cartagena Convention in 1999 and entered into force in 2010, recognizes that the wider Caribbean region's marine and coastal resources have ecological, economic, aesthetic, scientific, and cultural values, and along with human health, are seriously threatened by pollution from land-based sources and activities. After almost 20 years of the adoption of the Cartagena Convention and 10 of the adoption of the LBS protocol, pollution prevention and control from wastewater and agricultural runoff is still a challenge for the region. It represents a severe impact to the marine ecosystems, mainly due to high nutrient loads. In addition, the WCR represents high vulnerability to extreme events that is exacerbated by climate change. It mainly affects coastal areas where 41 million people live. This situation is having a high negative impact to the regional ocean-based economy that represents 18.4% of the GDP of the region, and therefore to the prosperity and welfare of the wider Caribbean region people. As a response to this scenario, during the last meeting of the Cartagena Convention last July, the importance of integrated water resource management was recognized, and a decision was taken to have a dedicated technical group to discuss this as an issue moving forward based on a regional IWRM conceptual framework to address existing challenges and opportunities. Integrated water resource management is a process which promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources to maximize the resulting economic and social welfare in an equitable and sustainable manner. It is a guiding process for the water community and the way to connect with other communities and natural resource management processes. Besides IWRM, other water resource management approaches have been proposed in recent years. The water security approach establishes a desirable condition that any society is expecting from water. That is, peacefully having water for human well-being and development, avoiding water-related health problems and disasters, and preserving biodiversity. Another example is the food, water, and energy nexus that supports an integrated planning approach among those main water users and is the best way to formulate effective and efficient solutions. Under current challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss, and with the need for resilience, building, and sustainable development, IWRM should play a leading role and can accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is the most important development agreement ever. It integrates 17 Sustainable Development Goals, known as SDGs, and for the first time, an SDG 6 about water, which goal is to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. That is sufficiency, sustainability, health, and inclusiveness. The water target comprises six targets and 11 indicators that represent a comprehensive global water resource management agenda for the years to come. In addition, the SDGs are a perfect map to road integration between different sectors that are working following the same goals. In this case, so water is very close related with poverty, with good health and well-being, with climate action, with life below water, with sustainable cities. So at the end, it's the best way to approach this challenge of integration. Under the current global challenges of development, climate change and biodiversity loss, and the need for resilience building, IWRM should play a leading role and can accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. Water is the #1 priority for adaptation action in most of the NDCs and is directly or indirectly related to all other priority areas under the Paris Agreement. IWRM could become a powerful tool for biodiversity conservation if the ecological role of hydrological regimes is understood and put in practice. Also, IWRM is a powerful approach that needs to be reinforced with other approaches to have a unified, resilient response to future risks. Based on previous experiences and future challenges, the wider Caribbean region needs an accelerated approach to adopt integrated water resource management. As a part of this approach, it is essential to develop a clear understanding of the benefits and potential synergies with other natural resource management and social processes to support sustainable development. Nowadays, more than ever, IWRM must be developed as an ecosystem-based process to maximize benefits for all, respecting economic and social constraints, and integrating solutions for climate change, human health, and development. Such a process should avoid being dominated by an economic sector or by emerging conflicts. It must be a governance process able to give voice to all and to build water security for the region. To develop or to propose an integrated water resource management framework for the region and support implementation of the Cartagena Convention, it was decided to start identifying common principles. These common principles are those listed in the slide and are very common to all the natural resource and development agendas nowadays. These principles are the ecosystem-based management. We need to think in an ecosystem-based way. The source-to-sea approach, we need to understand the importance of connectivity and how what happens at the mountains or the ridge has an impact on the coastal area. The sustainable consumption and production, we need to change the paradigm of consumption and production. We need to give value to our natural capital, so the principle of the natural capital approach. We need to create this science policy interface, and that's another principle. Building resilience is becoming the main goal and the main principle for everybody. Because of what's happening with the pandemic, the One Health for All principle is becoming quite important. We have realized how connected we are with the health of ecosystem and with the health of our own communities. And the public participation principle based on the SCASU agreement, that is a very unique agreement because it's a regional Latin American and Caribbean agreement, and it provides the basis for public participation. In addition to the common principles, in this work we identify where are those IWRM actions that must be present in any process, and how this action must be interpreted based on these common principles in order to create those synergies and integration that we are proposing. First of all, we need to start understand that water is a water governance process. Then a water governance model must be in place to support authority on each country. It must be an independent process, not dominated by any sector, but the place to get agreement among different stakeholders and society. Water must be understood as a part of the environment, and this is a very important issue. And if we think about the principle of ecosystem-based management, that's a way to go ahead. Water is part of the ecosystem. It has hydrological implications in all the ecology, that in land ecology, but also the coastal ecology. So water must be understood as a part of the ecosystems, and and we need to look for the water that is needed to play these ecological roles. Water budget and allocation must be considered perhaps the core activity of a water resource management agency, and it refers to define the amount of water that we have, the amount of water that we can use, who can use this water, and what is the legal instruments to allocate that water, and ensure transparency and accountability of those volumes of water that the society is given to any given user. Disaster risk management or disaster risk reduction must be part of this key integrated water resource management action. It must be part of this cycle. It has a lot of implication in terms of this reduction, in terms of how to manage our river basins, how to manage our rivers, how we manage our coastal areas. So it's important that this be part of the IWRM cycle. Of course, that any solution must be part of an integrated water resource management plan to ensure governance that we have common, to ensure goals, to ensure feasibility, accountability, and efficiency. And this planning, this integrated water resource management plan is closely related with the financial mechanisms in an iterative process where you plan, you have the financial restrictions normally, and you review your plan and get new proposals. One opportunity that is arising in many countries is the integration of ecosystem services and resources recovery practice as an opportunity to propose other way of getting financial resources. When I mean recovery practice is, for example, considering wastewater not as a waste, but as a resource that has a value. Also ecosystem services in terms of ecological services, sediment transport, nutrient treatment, assimilation of pollution. So those are the kind of ecosystem services that must be integrated, also based with this natural capital principle that we define in the last slide. Information and knowledge management is always an issue, but information and knowledge management must be part of the management process to support participation. We are always restricted by information. Lack of information and knowledge is very common, but it shouldn't be an obstacle to establish an IWRM process. On the contrary, it must be part of the same process, of the same management process. And as we generate better information and better knowledge, we can review and iterate our planning process and our IWRM cycle of management cycle. So those are the key IWRM action that must be present in any process to create this, to look for those synergies and create integration. Finally, the IWRM conceptual framework that is proposed to support the Cartagena Convention is based on the idea of linking the power of the current global agendas with the needs of local processes through a regional entity, that's the Cartagena Convention, to open spaces and create dialogues and synergies among different sectors and actors. The IWRM conceptual framework presents at global level water as a connector that integrates implementation of the 2030 SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. At local level, there are three processes that must be guide integration of water and marine programs under a resilient goal. That is IWRM, Disaster Risk Management, DRM, and Integrated Coastal Zone Management. At regional level, the Cartagena Convention would play a brokering role to promote a management cycle in which the global agenda fit the local projects and the local projects meet global commitments through a regional institutional structure. Well, in practice, what we are talking about in terms of integration of agendas or programs, this table is showing some examples of what could be an integration based on the principles that we identify and we explain. And those three main management processes at the coastal areas. And for example, in terms of ecosystem-based management, well, IWRM should implement ecological flows based on hydrological regime needed at the coastal ecosystems. Land use plans for coastal ecosystem risk reduction is another option. Source to sea, well, it's important to protect water catchment, storage, and distribution. In terms of disaster risk reduction, define the river hydraulic capacity for protection in terms of floodplains, repairing corridors. And well, these are some examples of how to start working together and creating synergies. For example, one very good example is in terms of natural capital. It could be mangrove management, could be an interesting ecosystem to propose to promote integrated value of coastal ecosystem services, and it requires intervention from water management, but also coastal zone management, and it's very important for disaster risk reduction. This is just some examples that could be useful for start discussing how to integrate. Finally, what we are expecting about this approach, why this IWRM conceptual framework is different from other approaches or other experiences? Well, it opens the process to other sectors such as environment and health, and other processes such as DRM and integrated coastal zone management. It is based on common principles, particularly ecosystem-based management principles, to promote integration and to build long-term solutions. It is geographically focused on the coastal zone and oriented to the climate adaptive restoration conservation of the marine ecosystem as a common goal. It clarifies that although full water and sanitation coverage is urgently needed, it cannot be the only goal for the water sector in the region. IWRM must guide a broader process to build water security for all. It observes the importance of having a water governance structure in place, supported by the Escazú Agreement as a unique binding agreement for Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was interesting. It's food for thought, and I'm open to any comment and question that you would have. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barrios. That was a great presentation. Now, at this time, all our moderators, all our speakers can turn on their cameras so that folks can see you. And of course, you just, for safety, for noise sake, keep your mics muted until called upon. If you have any questions, folks, we do have some questions in the chat already. Just a gentle reminder, you can continue to post your questions and I will present them to the speakers today. You can do so in Hover as well as Zoom. We will do our best to answer all your questions today. And if we run out of time, you can find the speaker's contact information on the speaker's page in Hover. So let's get with the questions. So the first question I have that came in, as Kevin was the first speaker. Question for Kevin. What are the water quality standards for groundwater discharge in Florida? Two-part question. And how would you advise us based on implementation and quality standards that Florida has experienced? What are the water quality standards for groundwater discharge in Florida? And how would you advise us based on implementation and quality standards that Florida has experienced?
Great. Well, thank you for that question. And those are the types of questions I was hoping that I would spark with this type of presentation, learning from our rules, what sort of rules, if you don't already have them for water reuse, how would those be implemented? We do have very robust groundwater standards. We actually break down our groundwater discharge rules by types of groundwater and the use. So what I would recommend is we would, look at our rules and our science that led to those rules and our characteristics of our groundwater, where there's similarities in the Caribbean. For example, particularly in South Florida, we have basically Swiss cheese geology, very permeable, water moves. So we have very protective groundwater standards. So I can share those numbers to you and then talk about which ones would probably most be applicable. And those groundwater standards are related to our drinking water standards. And so those types of connections are important. We also have standards where we have a technology called aquifer storage and recovery, where we have certain geological formations where we're able to put down water highly treated and then store it and then bring it back up, which is why I have a lot of hydrogeology friends, because I'm not sure how that process works from a technical standpoint, but it's very popular here in the state of Florida. And then just for groundwater, I have our reuse rules up. I'll read you a line from our reuse rule 62.610 in Florida rulemaking speak. Reuse and land application projects shall be designed and operated to ensure compliance with groundwater standards. And so you have to do an engineering report and show how your project, no matter which type it is in water reuse, will not violate groundwater standards. So I'm not sure who asked that, but certainly I have set up a chat room here for the conference, or email me, and I continue to have that conversation about appropriate rules.
Thanks, Kevin. Yes, I remember when I did live and work in Florida in the on-site sewage treatment disposal department of health. Florida was very strict on discharging to the environment, even with septic tanks and soakaways, because the groundwater is so high. I mean, there's certain parts of the state, if you dig a hole to put in a fence post, you hit water. I've seen that happen.
That's
So
right.
yeah, Florida is very tough on discharge to the environment. Candice, I'm not sure. I want to try and get you. I know that your
Hi, Wayne.
internet. Hi, is your internet connection okay?
It is somewhat better, but rain is still pouring in my location. So I would just answer any questions.
I will go right ahead right away. What are the next steps for Tobago? This one's for you. Have they secured funding for implementation of any of the targeted projects?
So we have secured funding for some of the projects, or subsets of the projects. So for instance, under exploring new sources, we now have a Tobago well development program. And attached to that well development program, we also have a storage initiative attached to it. So once we drill these new sources, we put it on stream, we're able to give access to 24/7 supply to more of our customers and more persons in Tobago. We also able to have some level of increased storage on the island.
Okay, great.
In terms of the water information management system, quite recently, we entered into a partnership with UNEP Crew Plus to do a water information management system. And this is not just a project attached to water security, but for us as a whole in Trinidad and Tobago to really collate and collect and archive all the data in the water sector, and therein find the gaps, because we realized by doing projects such as the water security program that we had gaps in terms of data collection and data that we may need to drive us further and to drive decision making.
Great. Thank you. There was a question on the water information management system, and you answered that as well. Thank you. Let me keep rotating. I'll come back to Kevin for now. It says, other than legislation, what was done for public acceptance for reuse water?
Another good question again, to transfer knowledge. A lot of local efforts were put forth to make the public acceptance of reuse, particularly when we talk about irrigation. One of the ways that we made it very appealable is it was very cheap, is available. And so when we would talk about how, during droughts, we have water restrictions in our state, people's yards turn brown and golf courses. Now we have a solution to that problem. And so that was one of the biggest parts of our successes of getting the irrigation accepted. Now, potable reuse is going to be a different level, I would say. The city of San Diego estimated, I think it was 7 years, their public education campaign in order to have people feeling acceptable about having it in their drinking water, in their drinking water coming through the tap. So that's the next stage. And one thing we're doing in Florida is the utilities is we're now reaching out to people who do communication and education for a living. Well, we've done a decent job with outreach, but why not bring on people who that's what they do? Just like we think about water, they think about education. And so that's something that's really been something we've picked up over the last 5 years to help us with all realms of our public outreach, is let the experts tell your story. They interact with you, and they know how the public takes the messaging the best.
Okay, great. Yeah, it does take some time, and the irony is that we've all drunk reused water already, but we don't want to know that. Question for Eugenio. Due to carbon footprint, what contribution has drinking water plants has to climate change?
Who was that to?
Mr. Barrios.
Okay.
Due to the carbon footprint, what contribution has drinking water plants to climate change?
Well, I assume it's related with the energy, yeah, with the energy consumption of the salination. And well, it will depend on the, well, relating this question with my presentation, I think one of the main challenge we have is how to integrate and how to make those trade-offs between carbon footprint and water footprint and our needs for development. So I think at the end, it will be the best balance for the country. And you need to decide where are the commitments in terms of energy, but also in terms of development and in terms of sustainability. So I think having this integrated approach is the best way to really understand what are the implications of those trade-offs, and that would be part of my answer. I'm not a specialist on drinking water supply, so I cannot answer that. But just to end, I know that many water utilities are approaching renewable energy in terms of having to reduce the carbon footprint. So those are the challenges ahead.
Yeah, that's quite accurate. I know that they're looking at operation on pumps with solar power. They're looking at different controllers for the motors, because when you turn on a motor, it goes full speed. And sometimes it's wasting energy because you only need it to run at half. So they have VFDs and then you put on that. Just one question as we're coming to the end here for Mr. Barrios. You did a lot of work in Mexico. So one of the questions are in terms of the governance and water budgets, those kind of things, because we're trying to get the utilities, CWWA is one of the folks trying to get the utilities to at least do a water budget and be honest and see exactly, what that story is. And then you can target solutions. In Mexico, what was your experience like with getting some of the utilities to come aboard with some of these plans?
Well, in our experience, one of the missing pieces in the water planning process was the water budget. And just to benefit of everybody, of our participants, when I talk about water budgets, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the water as a source, as a planning source. One thing that we developed in the last 2 years and is now in the National Water Plan for the 2020-2024 is a national water budget for each river basin. And in that, each river basin and aquifer. And in that water planning process, we identify the amount of water that will be needed for drinking water purposes in the following until 2050, and also for industrial, for agricultural, and make it the projections. And also, well, one very important issue is the water that we need for the environment. And then we develop this budget for each river and aquifer in the country, and we identify those basins with a deficit and those systems in equilibrium and those systems with availability, with water availability. And that's let's say the baseline to start projecting and start planning infrastructure development ahead. It's something new in Mexico, but is put in this water budget at the core of the planning process, and it will be interesting to see what's going on in the next years. And of course, water utilities are key players on this, because they have this allocation and they have to plan to make their own plans based on this future restriction or supply or availability of water that we have.
Great, thank you. I think that we reached the end of our session here. I want to thank everybody for participating today. We hope you enjoyed it. I know that there was a lot of really good information shared today by our speakers. And remember, if you have any additional questions for our speakers, you may reach out to them by phone or email, and you can find this information at Hoover. Everybody's information is there. So finally, I'd like to encourage you all to visit our virtual exhibition booths to learn more about what is there to offer and how they can help you. A reminder also of our 30th anniversary celebration this afternoon, 3 o'clock Cayman time, 4 o'clock Atlantic Standard Time, GMT -4. So on behalf of the CWWA and the Water Authority Cayman, we're so glad you joined us. Thank you for attending.